You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, even amid the raft of posts that Donald Trump sends out on a daily basis, this one caught my attention in particular. So I'm going to put this right here on the screen. Cease and desist. I, together with many attorneys and legal scholars, am watching the sanctity of the 2024 presidential election very closely because I know, better than most, the rampant cheating and skullduggery that has taken place by the Democrats in the 2020 presidential election. It was a disgrace to our nation. Therefore, the 2024 election, where votes have just started being cast, will be under the closest professional scrutiny, and when I win, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences so that this depravity of justice does not happen again. We cannot let our country devolve into a third world nation, and we won't. Please be aware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels, unfortunately, never seen before in our country. So Glenn, aside from the obvious where he complains that the election that is ongoing right now is already being stolen from him to give him something of a predicate to be able to cry fraud later when he loses, there was a sentence in particular that caught my attention. Please be aware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Now, of course, all of those people, in his opinion, are going to be people that are just encompassed within those who opposed him. Any lawyers who argued against him in court are those who opposed him. Any political operatives, including folks like you and me. Any corrupt election officials, which in his mind are just going to be people who deigned to certify the election results and didn't just declare him the winner. Can you talk about what he's basically trying to say by shining a spotlight on everybody involved in the political process, casting them all as his political opponents ahead of this election, and what it means if he becomes the next president?
Yeah, what it looks like he's trying to accomplish, Brian, is he's trying to chill his opponents, right? He's trying to chill people from either, accurately reporting what he's doing, speaking out against his insanity, going to the polls and voting for his opponent. So in real terms, he is trying to chill those who might deign to speak out or vote against him. If there is any silver lining here, he calls this a cease and desist letter and he says it will have legal implications. Well, guess what? It won't, because a cease and desist letter is actually used in the law. It's a term of art. And so, for example, before you bring certain civil suits, legal action against people for perhaps using your copyrighted material without your authority or saying defamatory things about you, often people will send a cease and desist letter to try to get it to stop, which in some cases is a prerequisite to actually bringing certain legal actions. The fact that he slaps the words cease and desist on a post on his third-rate social media platform or on, you don't call it a tweet. I don't know what you call it on X.
I'll call it a tweet until my dying day.
Okay, I've heard people call it an excrement. Something to be said for that.
Yeah.
It has absolutely no legal impact. But he's making sort of quasi-legal threats against people, trying to chill, trying to shut down his opponents and threatening long prison terms. Well, so much for any separation between the White House and the Department of Justice and its prosecutorial discretion and decisions. So, this is more of the same from Donald Trump. It will have no legal effect, but it may very well have a chilling effect to those people who can be chilled by Donald Trump's unhinged and often violence-inducing rants and posts.
We have seen, to a certain degree, folks fall for this chilling effect. I mean, the fact that the Washington Post and the LA Times both refuse to endorse. I mean, when you've got the Washington Post, a newspaper whose slogan is "Democracy Dies in Darkness," refusing to endorse in an election cycle where one candidate incited an insurrection and vowed to terminate the Constitution and be a dictator on day one, there is this sense that in anticipation of a potential Donald Trump win that they already don't want to upset him. So aren't we already seeing this chilling effect play out in real time? Not necessarily with the people who Donald Trump called out in this post, but just more broadly with anybody who might not want to get on the wrong side of him because, they'd rather make sure to set themselves up for the aftermath of a potential Trump win than bother standing up for even the most basic core tenets of democracy.
Yeah, I would put the people who respond to this or who react to it and perhaps make decisions about what to say or not to say, what to do or what not to do. I put them kind of in two categories, right? You've got the Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post, who, as you just said, for gosh sakes, it's a newspaper whose motto is democracy dies in darkness. And then what do? They go dark, refusing for the first time in decades to endorse a presidential candidate when they were on the verge, according to the reporting, of endorsing Kamala Harris. I don't see the Washington Post as being necessarily afraid of Donald Trump and what he might do in the extremely unlikely event he is elected again. I see this as a potential business decision by Bezos, right? The category of people that I put in the sort of the business decision class are the millionaires and the billionaires and the Republican oligarchs who are going to look to make as much money off of a second Donald Trump presidency as they can. So maybe they decide to do or decline to do certain things based on their profit motive, their bottom line. But then there's a whole nother batch of people, and frankly, in many ways, I think this is the more consequential batch of people who will read that, see it, they'll hear it, cease and desist, legal implications, long prison terms, and they may actually opt out of speaking the truth, exposing Donald Trump for the bullshit that he is forever throwing in the mix in the run-up to Election Day. So they may actually be fearful, be concerned that there is something to Donald Trump's ridiculous bluff and bluster about legal consequences and long prison terms. But you know what? The kind of damage that Donald Trump's pathetic and ridiculous inflammatory rhetoric can do in both of those two categories can be really damaging to our free and fair elections, really damaging to our democracy. And at the end of the day, who knows? But his lies and his threats, which are largely hollow threats on the legal front, they could end up tipping an American election. And, that is why I have long maintained, Brian, I'm not going to go down the parade of horribles that we discuss so often. I've long maintained that Donald Trump should have been dealt with by the institutions of government responsible for enforcing the law without fear or favor years ago. And because the institutions of government have declined to do it, we are where we are, on the verge of another presidential election where an aspiring dictator, a self-described day one dictator, somebody who said he will turn the military against the Democrats, whom he calls the enemy from within, is on the verge of actually being in the running to be president again.
Yeah, well, I hope that avoiding the optics of politicization were worth it for Merrick Garland to get to the point that we're at today, where Donald Trump is within a hair's breadth of becoming the next president, because the DOJ didn't bother moving forward with any aggressive and warranted action against him when they should have. But that's, at this point, that's moot. Glenn, I do want to point to something in particular that actually, I think, kind of encompasses you and I, and that is that he said, beware that this legal exposure extends to political operatives. I think Donald Trump would consider both of us political operatives, which raises the question, is there anything for those quote-unquote political operatives, as well as all of the other people he listed here, lawyers, donors, election officials, who, of course, he'll call corrupt if they don't bend to his will, but is there any actual legal exposure in the event that Donald Trump were to become president, that he could manipulate or pervert the law in some way that folks like you and I could even be at risk under a Trump presidency?
Yeah, this is not just a soundbite. Is there legal exposure? No. Is there illegal exposure? You're damn right there is. What do I mean by that? Listen, anytime you have somebody who aspires to be president of the United States saying he will turn the military against the people if those people are his perceived enemies, let's face it, Brian, you and I are undoubtedly his perceived enemy because we speak the truth about the rule of law and accountability and the need to protect and fight for our democracy and our free and fair elections. So there's no legal consequences that could be leveled against us because what we are doing is not only honest, accurate, and truthful, but for gosh sakes, it's protected by the First Amendment against the government retaliating or clamping down on our free speech. But I say on the illegal front, he could violate the Constitution in as many ways as he pleases and retaliate against you, against me, against anybody that he perceives as an enemy of his, whether they are, on TV, they're on YouTube, they are true political operatives like part of the Democratic Party machinery who are working to get Kamala Harris elected, whether they are lawyers who are fighting in court like Mark Elias and others who are trying their best to, protect our free and fair elections. So illegally, he could retaliate in any way he chooses. And here is what keeps me up at night, Brian. The Supreme Court, the radical ideologues, the 6 block justices on the Supreme Court who deign to give him a blueprint for lawlessness in their absolute immunity ruling are all but encouraging Donald Trump to retaliate against folks like us. That whole laundry list of folks you just read in Donald Trump's posts. And they're telling Donald Trump he can do it without being held criminally responsible for it. That is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for dictatorship. It's a recipe to convert our beloved democracy into a banana republic. And we always say this is the most important election of our lifetime. This time, it really is. Because if we're going to keep our republic, then we have to make sure Donald Trump doesn't get to retake the reins of governmental power so he can illegally go against his perceived enemies.
All of which underscores the importance right now for everybody watching, everybody listening here to get your ballots in. If you have them at home, make sure you get them in. If you have the opportunity to go in and vote early, make sure to do that. A, don't leave this thing up to chance by getting your ballots submitted on the last day and having to be at the whim, basically, of Louis DeJoy's USPS. B, it will allow the campaigns the opportunity to focus their limited resources and their get out the vote efforts on people who haven't voted yet, people who may be true undecided voters. So if you're watching this, chances are that you are a highly engaged voter in this country, that you're somebody who pays attention, who cares about this kind of stuff. So go get your ballot in. Make sure the campaigns can focus on people who are truly choosing between the ballot box and the couch. With that said, of course, we will stay on top of all of these threats that Donald Trump continues to level against people and continue ringing this bell and sounding the alarm so that people know what's at stake in this upcoming election. Again, please make sure to get your ballots in and get your votes cast and make sure that your voice is heard in this election. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.